What if the single most powerful force shaping how people treat you isn't your words, your appearance, or even your actions, but rather a part of yourself you've been taught to hide since childhood? A shadow self that once acknowledged could transform how the entire world responds to you. Alex stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the empty eyes looking back at him. For 37 years, he had done everything right, earned the degrees, secured the job, maintained the polite smile during countless conversations where he felt completely unseen. Yet something essential was missing. People looked through him rather than at him. His opinions were overlooked in meetings. Even in social gatherings, conversations seemed to flow around him like water around a stone. What Alex didn't realize was that he was about to discover the psychological principle that Carl Jung considered the key to authentic human connection. One that would not only change how others perceived him, but would fundamentally transform his relationship with himself. In the next few minutes, you'll learn the exact process that allowed Alex to break free from invisibility and command a presence that others couldn't help but notice and respect. The change wasn't immediate, of course. It began with a single, uncomfortable realization that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. But once Alex understood what was happening beneath the surface of his interactions, everything shifted. People who had previously ignored him now sought his opinion. Colleagues who had overlooked his contributions now deferred to his expertise. Even strangers responded to him differently, as if they were suddenly seeing him for the first time. Before I reveal the exact moment that changed everything for Alex, ask yourself this. When was the last time you felt truly seen by another person? Not your achievements, not your carefully constructed persona, but the authentic you that exists beneath all those layers. Because what you're about to discover might explain why that genuine connection has been so elusive. The story begins on an ordinary Tuesday. Alex sat in the conference room, his presentation materials meticulously arranged before him. He had spent the entire weekend preparing, researching every possible question, anticipating every challenge. As colleagues filed in, a few nodded vaguely in his direction, but most continued their conversations without acknowledging his presence. This wasn't new. Alex had grown accustomed to being the invisible man in the room, respected on paper for his competence, but somehow fading into the background of every interaction. "We should get started," announced his supervisor, glancing around the room. "Has anyone seen the quarterly analysis?" "It's right here," Alex said, raising the document he had prepared. "I've completed it with the additional metrics you requested." His supervisor looked surprised, as if noticing Alex for the first time. "Oh, great. Let's take a look at that. After we discuss the new marketing strategy." An hour later, Alex's report remained untouched on the table. His carefully researched recommendations went unheard as the meeting adjourned. As he gathered his papers, a heaviness settled in his chest, that familiar weight of invisibility. That evening, unable to shake his frustration, Alex found himself wandering into a small bookshop he had passed hundreds of times but never entered. Rain tapped gently against the windows as he moved between shelves of old volumes. His fingers brushed across spines until they stopped on a weathered book, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, by Carl Jung. Alex had heard of Jung, of course, the Swiss psychiatrist who had worked with Freud before developing his own theories of analytical psychology. Something about the title resonated with his current state of mind. He opened to a random page and read, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." A strange sensation washed over Alex, as if these words, written decades before he was born, had been waiting specifically for him. He purchased the book and hurried home, where he spent the night immersed in Jung's exploration of the human psyche. What Alex discovered in those pages would fundamentally alter his understanding of himself and everyone around him. Jung proposed that each person carries a shadow, those parts of ourselves we have rejected, suppressed, or denied. This shadow isn't just our negative qualities, but any aspect of our true nature that we've learned to hide, even positive traits, deemed inappropriate by our family, culture, or society. The revelation hit Alex with unexpected force. His entire life had been an exercise in hiding his true self. Since childhood, he had learned to suppress his natural enthusiasm when his father called it childish. He had buried his creative intuition when teachers rewarded only logical analysis. He had silenced his opinions when they diverged from the group consensus. Year after year, he had constructed what Jung called a persona, a mask designed to gain social acceptance while his authentic self retreated deeper into shadow. And people, Jung suggested, don't respond to our masks. At some unconscious level, they sense the disconnection between what we present and what lies beneath. The more we hide our shadow, the more inauthentic we appear, and the less others truly connect with us. Alex closed the book at 3 a.m, his mind racing. Could this explain why people seemed to look through him rather than at him? Was his carefully constructed persona, competent, agreeable, non-threatening, actually making him invisible? The next morning, Alex stood before the same bathroom mirror, but now he was looking for something different. Behind the polite expression he had worn for decades, he sought glimpses of his shadow. All the aspects of himself he had hidden away. The ambition he had tamped down to avoid appearing selfish. The anger he had suppressed to remain likable. The unconventional ideas he had censored to fit in. What if, he whispered to his reflection, I've been hiding the very parts of myself that would make others truly see me? That morning marked the beginning of what Alex would later call his shadow work, a deliberate journey to reclaim the disowned parts of himself. Jung believed that the process of individuation, becoming psychologically whole, requires us to recognize, accept, and integrate our shadow aspects rather than projecting them onto others or burying them where they fester and emerge in unexpected ways. Alex pulled out a leather-bound journal he had received years ago, but never used. On the first page, he wrote a question: what parts of myself have I been hiding? The answer didn't come immediately. It required peeling back layers of habitual thinking, of social conditioning that had become so ingrained he hardly noticed its presence. He began by recalling moments of unexpected emotion, times when his reaction seemed disproportionate to the situation. A colleague receiving praise for an idea similar to one Alex had mentioned weeks earlier, prompting a flash of resentment he quickly suppressed. The subtle tightening in his chest when friends discussed taking risks he would never allow himself to consider. The strange mixture of admiration and discomfort he felt around people who expressed themselves without apparent concern for others' approval. These emotional triggers, Jung suggested, often point toward our shadow. The qualities in others that provoke strong reactions are frequently the very traits we've disowned in ourselves. Alex realized with growing clarity that the outspoken colleagues who commanded attention in meetings possessed qualities he had buried within himself: assertiveness, conviction, a willingness to stand apart from consensus. "It's not that I can't be those things," Alex wrote in his journal. "It's that I've convinced myself I shouldn't be." A memory surfaced from his childhood. 10-year-old Alex excitedly sharing his opinion during a family dinner, only to be cut off by his father's sharp reminder that nobody likes a know-it-all. The message had been clear. Being too confident, too knowledgeable, too visible was socially dangerous. Better to blend in, to speak only when spoken to frame every opinion as a tentative suggestion. This pattern of self-effacement had served a purpose once: protection, acceptance, belonging. But now, approaching 40, Alex could see how this outdated strategy had become a prison, keeping others at arm's length and rendering him forgettable in both professional and personal contexts. Jung's approach was clear. Acknowledgement had to come before change. Rather than attempting to transform himself overnight, Alex would need to first recognize and accept these disowned aspects of his personality. The shadow, when denied, doesn't disappear. It grows stronger in the darkness and manifests in unpredictable ways. Only by bringing it into consciousness could he begin to integrate these qualities consciously rather than having them emerge unconsciously. For the next week, Alex became an observer of his own behavior. He noticed how he physically shrank in meetings, how he prefaced every opinion with qualifiers like, "I might be wrong, but," or "this is just a thought." He caught himself nodding in agreement even when he disagreed, laughing at jokes he didn't find funny, and carefully modulating his enthusiasm to never exceed the group's energy level. These behaviors weren't calculated. They were automatic responses installed decades ago and running without his conscious awareness. The first step toward change wasn't trying to act differently, but simply becoming aware of these patterns and the shadow aspects they were designed to hide. On Friday afternoon, Alex sat in another department meeting. As discussion turned to a new project timeline, he felt the familiar surge of concern. The deadline seemed unrealistic based on his experience with similar projects. Normally, he would have remained silent or offered a heavily qualified suggestion that could be easily dismissed. This time, he observed the impulse to self-censor, recognized it as his pattern, and made a different choice. Not an aggressive transformation, but a small step toward integration. "I have concerns about this timeline," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. No qualifiers, no apologetic tone, just a clear statement of his professional assessment. The room didn't collapse, lightning didn't strike. Instead, his manager turned toward him with an attentive expression. "What specifically concerns you, Alex?" For perhaps the first time in his career, Alex spoke with the full weight of his experience and knowledge. He outlined the potential bottlenecks, referenced similar projects that had faced delays, and suggested a more realistic schedule. When he finished, there was a moment of silence, not the dismissive kind he feared, but the thoughtful pause that follows meaningful contribution. "Those are excellent points," his manager finally said. "Let's adjust our expectations accordingly." As the meeting concluded, two colleagues approached him separately to thank him for speaking up, admitting they had harbored the same concerns but hadn't voiced them. Walking back to his desk, Alex felt a strange new sensation expanding in his chest, not the tight knot of anxiety that usually followed any moment of visibility, but something lighter, something that felt surprisingly like authentic presence. This small success emboldened him to continue his experiment. Jung had written that the shadow contains not only our socially unacceptable qualities, but also our unlived potential, capabilities and strengths we've been afraid to claim. If Alex had been suppressing his professional confidence, what other aspects of himself had he denied? What other authentic parts were waiting to be reclaimed? That weekend, instead of preparing anxiously for the coming work week as usual, Alex accepted an invitation to a friend's gallery opening, an event he would typically avoid for fear of not knowing what to say or how to act in a more creative, expressive environment than he was accustomed to. His shadow work had revealed an unexpected truth. Beneath his carefully constructed image as a practical, analytical professional lay a dormant appreciation for art, for beauty, for experiences that couldn't be quantified or analyzed. At the gallery, surrounded by abstract paintings and sculptures, Alex felt initially out of place. His instinct was to retreat to the corner, to observe without participating, to make himself as unobtrusive as possible. But now, aware of this pattern, He could make a conscious choice rather than following his habitual response. A vibrant canvas of blues and reds caught his attention. While others moved past it quickly, Alex found himself transfixed, sensing something in the chaotic strokes that resonated with his own internal landscape. The controlled exterior and the tumultuous emotions beneath. When the artist approached and asked what he thought, Alex's first impulse was to deflect with a safe, generic compliment. Instead, he shared his genuine reaction. "It makes me think about the contrast between what we show the world and what's actually happening inside us." The artist's eyes widened with interest. That's exactly what inspired this series. The persona versus the shadow self. I've been exploring Jung's concepts through color and form. The synchronicity of this encounter struck Alex profoundly. By allowing himself to express an authentic response rather than a calculated one, he had created a moment of real connection. Their conversation deepened, drawing others in, and by the end of the evening, Alex had been invited to a private showing the following month. More importantly, he had experienced firsthand what Jung meant about the power of authenticity, how being real, even briefly, created a gravitational pull that superficial interactions never could. This principle extended beyond social gatherings. In the weeks that followed, Alex began the delicate work of reintroducing his shadow aspects into his daily life. Not as dramatic personality shifts, but as small acts of reclamation. In meetings, he allowed his natural analytical abilities to shine without dimming them to avoid outshining others. In conversations, he expressed genuine opinions rather than automatically agreeing with the most dominant voice in the room. When passion or enthusiasm arose naturally, he didn't suppress it to maintain an image of cool detachment. Each small act of authenticity felt like removing a thin layer of the mask he had worn for so long. And with each layer removed, something remarkable happened. People began to respond to him differently. Colleagues sought his input rather than talking over him. His boss started bringing him into important discussions where previously he would have been overlooked. Even casual acquaintances engaged with him more deeply, as if suddenly aware of his presence in a way they hadn't been before. A particularly telling moment came during a company-wide presentation. Alex had been asked to explain a complex analysis his team had completed, an opportunity he would previously have approached with anxiety, carefully restricting his natural enthusiasm to avoid appearing too eager or intense. This time, he allowed himself to speak with the genuine passion he felt for the work, to use his hands expressively as he naturally tended to do, to let his voice rise and fall with the importance of different points, rather than maintaining the flat professional tone he had cultivated. Afterward, the CEO, who had never spoken directly to Alex before, approached him. "That was illuminating. I finally understand what your department has been trying to tell us. We need more of this kind of clarity." That night, Alex returned to Jung's writings with new appreciation. He had experienced firsthand what the psychologist had observed nearly a century earlier. People instinctively resist plastic people. The parts of ourselves we think make us more acceptable often achieve the opposite effect. By hiding our shadows, our complexity, our contradictions, our authentic reactions, we paradoxically become less compelling, less trustworthy, less visible to others. The process wasn't always comfortable. Reclaiming disowned aspects of himself meant confronting why he had rejected them in the first place. Each shadow element connected to painful memories, moments of shame, rejection, or misunderstanding that had taught him to hide these parts away. There were setbacks and moments of doubt when the old patterns reasserted themselves, when the temptation to slip back into invisibility felt safer than the vulnerability of being seen. But increasingly, Alex recognized that what Jung called the shadow contained not just his feared qualities, but also his greatest potential. His natural leadership abilities had been buried alongside his fear of rejection. His creative thinking had been suppressed along with his fear of appearing foolish. His capacity for deep connection had been hidden with his fear of vulnerability. 6 months into his shadow work, Alex encountered a situation that would have previously paralyzed him. His department faced a critical decision about resource allocation. With senior management pushing for an approach Alex believed would ultimately fail. In the past, he would have voiced token resistance before quietly complying, then suffered in silence as the predicted problems materialized. Now, drawing on both his professional expertise and his newly reclaimed authentic voice, he requested a meeting with the executive team. Without apology or excessive deference, he presented his case clearly, confidently, and with conviction. He didn't posture or power struggle. He simply embodied the integration Jung had described, where professional competence was neither hidden nor weaponized, but expressed as a natural extension of his whole self. The proposal was approved, marking not just a professional victory, but evidence of a profound psychological shift. Alex hadn't changed who he was fundamentally. He had simply stopped hiding the strengths that had always existed within his shadow. In his journal that evening, Alex noted something Jung had written that now made perfect sense. "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." The parts of himself he had been hiding weren't weaknesses to be ashamed of. They were essential aspects of his wholeness waiting to be reclaimed. And as he integrated these disowned pieces, the world's response to him transformed accordingly. The most profound shift in Alex's life came unexpectedly, not in a professional breakthrough, but in a personal revelation that would ultimately test everything he had learned about shadow integration. On a crisp autumn morning, his phone lit up with a message that made his stomach drop. His father, the man whose disapproval had shaped so much of his self-concealment, had fallen ill and was asking to see him. Alex hadn't spoken to his father in nearly 3 years, their relationship having devolved into perfunctory holiday calls and the occasional stilted family gathering. Their last significant interaction had been an argument where his father had dismissed Alex's career choices as playing it safe, an accusation that struck at the heart of everything Alex had been confronting in his shadow work. Standing in his apartment, staring at the message, Alex felt the old patterns rising, the instinct to please, to perform, to hide his authentic reactions behind a veneer of dutiful son. But now he could recognize these as learned strategies, not inescapable truths. The question wasn't whether to see his father, but how to do so while maintaining the wholeness he had worked so hard to reclaim. 3 days later, Alex sat beside his father's hospital bed, the steady beep of monitors marking the silence between them. His father looked smaller somehow, diminished by illness and age in ways Alex hadn't been prepared for. When their eyes met, Alex expected to feel the familiar shrinking sensation, the automatic deference that had characterized their relationship for decades. Instead, he felt something entirely different, a calm presence, neither defensive nor performative. For perhaps the first time, he was meeting his father not as the child seeking approval, nor as the rebellious opposite, but simply as himself, complex, contradictory, and complete. "You seem different," his father said finally, his voice weaker but his gaze as penetrating as ever. Alex nodded. "I am different. Or maybe I'm finally the person I've always been underneath." What followed was the most honest conversation they had ever shared. Alex spoke without hiding his feelings, without calculating the safest response, without the desperate need for validation that had previously defined their interactions. He expressed both his lingering hurt from childhood and his genuine concern, in the present moment, holding seeming contradictions that would have once felt impossible to reconcile. His father listened with an attention Alex had never experienced from him before. When he finally spoke, his words suggested that perhaps Alex wasn't the only one who had been hiding behind a carefully constructed persona. "I always thought showing weakness would make me a failure as a father," the older man admitted. "Now, I wonder how much I missed by trying to appear strong all the time." This exchange revealed the ultimate truth of Jung's shadow work, that our willingness to integrate our disowned parts doesn't just transform how others see us, but creates a field of permission around us that allows others to be more authentic as well. By acknowledging his whole self, shadows and all, Alex had inadvertently created space for his father to glimpse parts of himself long hidden. After his father's eventual recovery, their relationship entered unfamiliar territory. Not perfect, understanding, but something more valuable, authentic engagement between two whole people rather than performances between two personas. What Alex discovered through this journey wasn't a trick or technique for making people treat him differently. It was something far more profound, the realization that when we stop hiding from ourselves, we become impossible to overlook. The very qualities we fear will push others away often become the magnetic core that draws meaningful connection toward us. Jung called this process individuation, the psychological journey toward becoming undivided within ourselves. It's not about perfection or self-improvement in the conventional sense, but about wholeness, accepting all parts of ourselves, even those that contradict our idealized self-image or social expectations. But here's what Jung didn't fully articulate, what Alex discovered through lived experience. This internal shift creates an external revolution. When we stop fragmenting ourselves, presenting one face to colleagues, another to family, yet another to strangers, we develop a gravitational authenticity that others can feel, even if they can't name it. People don't just treat us differently. They see us, perhaps for the first time. What would happen if you, like Alex, had the courage to reclaim the parts of yourself you've been hiding? What if the very qualities you've been suppressing are precisely what would allow you to command the room, to be truly heard, to connect deeply with others? What if your shadow isn't your enemy, but the missing piece of your personal power? The experiment is simple but profound. Identify one quality you've been hiding: your intensity, your sensitivity, your ambition, your creativity, and allow it expression in a single interaction today. Not as a performance or technique, but as an act of reclaiming your wholeness. Then watch carefully what happens, not just to how others respond, but to how you feel in that moment of authentic presence. Because here's what Alex ultimately discovered, and what Jung knew all along. The shadow isn't just dark, it also contains your unlived light. And when you integrate both, when you stand before the world as neither more nor less than who you truly are, something extraordinary happens. In that space of courageous authenticity, what's hiding in your shadow, waiting to transform how the world responds to you? What part of yourself, if reclaimed today, might change everything tomorrow? The answer, as Alex discovered, isn't out there in techniques or strategies. It's been within you all along, waiting in the shadow to be acknowledged, accepted, and finally gloriously embodied. The person everyone has been ignoring might be your authentic self. Reclaim it and watch as the world suddenly can't look away. What part of your shadow will you integrate today? Share in the comments below.